Hello, everybody. We're so happy to see you all today at the game convention at the Ann Arbor District Library. It's going to be a great day, and we've got some great panel discussions up here on the fourth floor all day. So my name's Christopher, and I'm here with Audrey and Marissa. Audrey's downstairs. If you have any questions about anything, you can let any staff members know. But I am particularly delighted to welcome three friends and three longtime veterans of gaming in Ann Arbor, Phill Cameron, and we've got Chris Salzman.
Hello.
And Andy Rao here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, talk a little bit about what games they play, ask a few hardball questions, turn it over to you, and and then I've got more questions if you don't. So I think we'll just begin. Thank you so much, and could you please help me welcome them to the panel discussion? Thank you.
Thank you all. Before I tell you about my gaming history, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the land that was ceded in the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. The Ann Arbor District Library is on the land of the Anishinaabe people and the Huron tribe. It's important to recognize that. That tribe still exists. There's this really awesome solar punk exhibit at the UMMA, actually, called Future Cache by... her name is, I took notes. Andrea Carlson is the artist that did that. And like I said, she doesn't call it solar punk, but it imagines decolonized futures.
Cool.
So UMMA, it's free. It's worth checking out. Long ago, no, not long ago, last week, 3 weeks ago, I played a game called Eat the Reich, which is a game where you play vampires, tasked with drinking all of Hitler's blood. It's available for pre-order. That was the last game. What was the other question, Chris?
Just to introduce yourself, yeah, and then
I think I've done enough.
It's a phenomenal introduction to Phill right there. Yeah. I'm Chris Salzman. I think, I am one half of the Roll for Topic podcast, so Andy over here is also part of it. So that's how we have sort of gotten connected with a lot of people here. So yeah, I play lots of different styles of game. Every once in a while, you'll catch me playing Dungeons and Dragons. I think the most recent game that I played a one-shot of Mouse Ritter, which is a really fun game where you pretend to be small mice, and one of the players, or a couple of the players, are actually here from that. Yeah, so that was super fun. Yeah, but I'm really interested in just sort of like games as a way to bring your friends together to have fun together. So.
Yeah, I'm Andy Rao, co-host with Chris of our podcast, and I guess I snuck in. I'm not actually from Ann Arbor. I'm from Grand Rapids, so if I have to leave, that's okay. To just make it simple. I started playing role-playing games back in the 80s, so I've been here forever. And these days, I have a kind of long-running game of Call of Cthulhu that I run for some of my family members. I just started an online game of Band of Blades. Nice. And in about a week, I have to run D&D for a bunch of 13-year-old boys. So,
wow.
So, yeah.
We'll be talking about that for the remainder of the hour.
So, if you send help.
It'll be delightful.
Wonderful. So let me start with a kind of big overall question about your philosophy of gaming, if you might have one. I don't think you have it written out, but you may have it subconsciously in your head. There are a lot of ideas about what RPGs are. Some people call them collective storytelling. I'm not sure that always fits the case every time I get together to game, or even when I've seen the three of you game. It's not always collective storytelling. Sometimes things happen that you don't want to happen, and that may not be so collective. So if you have any kind of an idea of how you approach gaming with your friends or with your players, I'd love to hear that.
Are we all going to defer to each other every time?
I went first last time.
Yeah.
So it's your turn now.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I can start. I think like I mentioned sort of my intro, like for me, it's all sort of about the fun that you're having. So I do really like collective storytelling when it comes down to it. I do also like taking control now and then and saying like, this is where the story is going too, because I think that can be helpful for groups to have something to sort of bounce off of when you're doing it. So for me, it's whenever you're playing games with your friends, you're agreeing to a set of rules that you're going to use to have that fun together, and I think that's totally okay to have mechanics. The point where the mechanics start to get in the way of that is when you need to say, let's stop, we can put those aside, let's just kind of rule of cool this, right? we can kind of keep playing from there. So like that's the philosophy that I bring to it. I think for me it is way more about the narrative than, say, min-maxing character sheets.
Yeah, I think I have a similar approach to Chris. For me, gaming is primarily an excuse to get together with people I care about, and a sort of framework or set of restrictions we can put around ourselves to have a particular type of fun. I don't usually approach role-playing games with the kind of metaphor of story, although it's delightful when story occurs. The most fun I have with the game sessions I run are ones where I feel that together with people I enjoy spending time with, we have collectively sort of solved a puzzle or achieved a goal within the restrictions and constraints we've chosen to apply to ourselves, whether that's within the framework of a particular rule system or within the framework of a particular genre we want to emulate. We've had a lot of fun in the last year running games set in the Aliens and Star Trek universes because they come with such wonderful tropes to lean into. So when I feel like the table has a good game session is one that ends where I feel like we've all collectively solved a puzzle or met a challenge.
Yeah. Andy said it best with, I play games mostly to bring people that I care about together. That's a pretty important part of the game. But I'm also quite social, so the other part of the game is different, and I run public games, and like Adventurers League for Dungeons and Dragons is where you go and anyone can come in, right? It's sort of like It's the coffee house of games where you know that you're going to get an adventure that follows the D&D thing. And those games, when I play those, I care about those people, and I wouldn't do it if I didn't. But in those games, it's about empowering the people and helping them to see additional narratives based on the systems, and then being able to take that memorableness back to their friends, right? And D&D is great for that. Many games are great for that, but the framework of D&D Adventurers League is that you can give them a memorable moment that they can then go tell their friends about and spread that empowerment.
Nice.
So people I care about, empowering players.
So I've just got a follow-up question. Do your characters ever die in a session, and do they have an expectation that there's a safety net that you will change the outcome of the story or the game, or massage the rules or fudge the dice so that that doesn't happen?
I'm too soft. So yeah, I don't have a good answer to that. I think, yeah, for me, like talking about empowerment and stuff, like it's very hard for me to go super hard against characters, because I think another kind of part of my philosophy is like being fans of the characters, right? And for me, it's very hard to be a fan of a character and also say, well, welcome to your doom, right? Yeah.
I generally speaking, in the sort of when I'm running a longer running campaign, character death usually doesn't happen very often or at all. And I think where I do, however, really embrace player character death in games where that's really genre appropriate. So playing Aliens, if you're playing in my game of Aliens, your character is very likely to die a bad death, right? And I run a lot of Call of Cthulhu, and death or insanity are things you should expect from the genre. I have run into trouble. The times where that's been a challenge has been when there's been a disconnect between what I assume the genre experience is going to be and what the players assume it will be. So, but yeah, I don't have a problem with player death, but it needs to add something, I think, rather than just simply punish a player or make them like to be the RPG equivalent of like losing your turn or something like that.
I play games where character death is important. Heart, the City Beneath is a role-playing game where your final level up action takes you out of the game and just ends your character narrative really powerfully. The same thing is true. I killed Paul's character 3 weeks ago in Eat the Reich, because that's kind of what you do. But again, there's a Blaze of Glory mechanic where you then get to like make a really indelible impact on the story,
Cool.
which is all just examples of what Andy was saying, that like if the genre and the conventions go for it, then yes. I don't think I've never killed anyone in a Dungeons and Dragons game, for example. So.
So do you tend to have a pre-scripted storyline and you're kind of railroading your characters through, or is it more of an open-ended sandbox? They can do anything they want, and you hope that they discover something fun to do that session?
I go with, what is it? The trope is called the quantum troll, where like no matter where they end up, there's something that exciting that's going to happen. So like if you take a left in the hallway, then, and this is in Theater of the Mind games, right? So when you are playing purely mentally, you can change the map, and then your players can always run into something interesting. And that's generally how I play. So that said, there's a lot of fun to be had in sandbox games where you just lay out a map, and that map is pre-generated with just a bunch of cool stuff, and whatever your players see, they see. The Aliens games are good for that. So the Free League Aliens have like cinematic experiences where you get a sandbox and a mission, and then you can go out and like, you can run those 3 or 4 times, even though they're one-shots, because there's so many different paths that the players can like go through them. Yeah. I would encourage, if you are a GM in the audience and you make a sandbox, just run it again. Change some names. Like you've done like 8 hours of work, and if it's play away from the table, fine, right?
Yeah.
Like if you enjoy doing that, great, but there's no reason not to rerun the same thing. Rotate your map 90 degrees, change the coloring.
No one will know. Yeah.
No one will know. And they will not go through the same experience because they're going to be playing different characters and they're different people from that moment. So, sandboxes.
I've run all games that run the gamut. I've run railroady adventure paths, and I've run more open sandboxy ones. I think my ideal environment is a sandbox with tight constraints. So my mind also went to the Aliens RPG because, like in a game like Aliens or another sci-fi game like that, you can impose tight constraints, like you're on the space station or the spaceship. You can't leave it. So there's a limit on your sandbox. I know that there's a level of roaming that the PCs will not be able to do. So I don't have to map out the solar system in case they decide to become like traders flying from planet to planet or something like that. But then I really try very hard not to assume one solution to problems. One of the great joys of role-playing, I think, is as the GM not knowing how the players will solve a problem I put in front of them. And if I myself have not pre-solved that problem, it's all the more delightful when they use, but then you do have the responsibility to fill the environment with enough things for them to engage with that they'll be able to come up with something. And they always come up with something.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they always come up with something really like that. I think I'm discovering as we're talking that the Aliens RPG is actually really good. Yeah, so you should maybe go check that out. Because I've played, Andy ran a game of that, and I just found it absolutely delightful because you had the sense of, there is a sandbox, but there's also like a ticking timer, right? And I think that's sort of the way to make a sandbox really work is you have to have a world that is going to continue on sort of without the player's interaction with it. But to get back to what Christopher was asking initially, for me, I really like to have like sort of story beats that I really want to hit. So I have nothing against trains. I like railroads and stuff like that. So I'm fine having like, we're going to hit these 4 or 5 story beats. And sort of in between there, I don't really care what happens other than there are problems, you're going to solve them and, in your own creative ways. And I often, as a sort of challenge to myself to sort of step back and release some control that I might want to keep, I will try to put those scenarios in there where it's like, I don't know what Andy was saying, like I don't know what's going to happen here. I know they're going to solve the problem, and I'm just going to kind of see what happens, and we'll roll with it. And that can be really fun, because again, you're sort of seeing what gets generated at the table, and that's just like, that's the reason to play these games, I think.
Yeah, it is funny. Players do always surprise you, and I know we joke about that, but it happens every single time.
Yeah.
I just want to say, if anyone has a question, just raise your hand. I'd be happy to come around with the mic. If not right now, I've got lots more questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had a question. Yeah, for everybody here, who all runs games here? Can you just like show of hands? Okay.
Oh, good.
Maybe I should have asked like who doesn't run games here. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, that's really good to know. Cool.
Great. So you've mentioned Aliens a few times. I never buy any proprietary pre-made world system. I think it's because my imagination is so stuck on the story that I already know exists. I think I'd have trouble coming up with something original in Aliens, or if I'm buying, a Lord of the Rings story, it's like, I don't know, they've just got to get rid of the ring,
Yeah.
How do you all feel about proprietary world games, and how do you give your players something unexpected?
Our friend Nate actually put it really well around that. So Eat the Reich is a really focused like one-shot, and there is a campaign for Aliens, but what we're talking about right now are they're called cinematic experiences, which are standalone products. You don't even need to buy the rule book to play the cinematic alien experiences. And again, there's enough in there to like, I'm excited to run it for a third time. But they are essentially like board games, right? So if you think of them more as a board game where you know what you're doing coming into it, it's still a good reason to get people you care about together. And it's a very specific kind of experience that you're having. So from that perspective, I really like the proprietary stuff, I would say. Comment? No, I'd love to hear what the audience has.
It's on.
So I run a number of games. Most recently, the most recent proprietary game that I've run was actually the Mistborn adventure game from Trendy. And as a huge fan of everything Brandon Sander said, I found it interesting to run a game, but instead of setting it during the time period of the books themselves, I set it like 3 or 4 years before the first book begins.
Nice, yeah.
And there is so much rich world building that there's so much stuff you can do within that world that hasn't even been touched on yet, because there's so much world and even universe building within there that you can do all sorts of things completely unrelated to the main story of the books.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I think like, yeah, whenever you're running something that's proprietary like that, right, you get the chance to sort of like, focus on the thing that you're really interested in, as part of it. And I think like, so we've mentioned genre, I think a few times up here. And I think like, that's the way to run something proprietary, is like you're getting a group of friends together that want to do something in that genre. So I played a Lord of the Rings campaign. A friend was running it, and we were the bumbling hobbits, right? Like that was the whole pitch, was like, you are going to play as hobbits, and we're going to have this like kind of bumbling adventure, right? And that was super fun because we all are like giant nerds who love hobbits and Lord of the Rings, right? So we could talk about Lord of the Rings in between every round because we're like, oh, this reminds me of that, right? Right, so like you're playing this story that is separate, but it is also referential back to the thing that you really know and you really love.
Yeah, I think those are all some good points. I have moved towards more of an appreciation for kind of established like franchise proprietary games, I guess. Partly because I think there's a lot of really good ones out there right now, and that hasn't always been the case over the decades of this hobby, but there's a lot of really good proprietary games that have really figured out how to like use their mechanics to support like a particular type of experience. And I also think that when it comes to some of these genres, that kind of creativity or originality is a little overrated.
Yes.
I'm thinking of the Star Trek games I ran, I don't want this to be the Aliens RPG panel, but like that's an easy example because why do you go into like a new Aliens movie expecting something really new? No. You know exactly what you're going to get, and all you ask for is that like a few details are changed around, or a few minor surprises come up. But that's and I do think that only works if everyone understands that this is the kind of experience we're working together to create. But when everyone shares that understanding, I mean, you can just I don't think you need to be very original.
Yeah, oh no, not at all. Yeah, Phil, you were mentioning right before we came on about session zeros, right, and just how important those are. So are people familiar? I feel like we're using a lot of like role-playing game terms, and I hope it's not going over people's heads, but maybe like, do you want to talk a little bit about session zeros, like, and how you think about them?
Yeah. Session 0 is actually session 1, right? It's when your friends show up and you're like, I'm excited for this game. And like most, and like, to be honest, campaigns sort of live and die on session 0/1, because if your players aren't bought into the premise of your game, like they will play it because they love getting together with you and you are a person they care about. But like that and being excited about the game really keeps the momentum going from session to session. So when I do a session 0, it's usually, I try to make sure that the premise of the game is incredibly fun, right? You're a vampire in occupied France drinking Hitler's blood. Like, no one says no to that. I promise. Or you are, whatever the premise of the game that you're playing is, right? And so drawing on those tropes is really important. And then making sure that everyone is excited by some part of the world, especially if it's a more campaign-oriented game. In session 0, then you talk about like, here's where we're gonna start, here's the things that are kind of around it. What would you like to see in the first time we play, right? And so building out the village that your characters live in and like getting the world rolling so that you have that referential, Mistborn world to like dive into right away. Yeah. Smaller, obviously, if it's your own campaign, but that's session 0 in a nutshell. It's like, what are your expectations and what are you most excited about?
Great.
I don't need the mic, thank you. On the opposite side of that, I've been running a lot of one-shots lately and running into not having enough time to finish. Do you have any suggestions for encompassing it all in one
Yeah, make them 2 shots. I'm so bad at this. Like, I will start a 1 shot and then it turns into a mini campaign, and then which is fine. You also can be sort of okay with just like, that's where it ended. You know, your epilogue can be a 2-minute conversation after the game as well. So,
There's
go ahead, yeah.
there's 2 hands up, but I do want to say, if you struggle with that, you should look up Strahd Must Die.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of it? Okay, so Strahd Must Die, for everyone else, is a Dungeons & Dragons game with a literal timer. You play it for 2 hours, and there's a sand clock or like a timer. And at the end, at like an hour and a half in, or maybe, I don't know, you can set the timer anyway.
It's like
there's
every half hour.
Yeah. Strahd, who is this gigantic, powerful vampire, shows up and like taunts you and like takes things away while you're trying to find ways to like kill Strahd. And then the last half hour is no matter where you are, no matter where your characters are, your players have to fight Strahd. So you've got an hour and a half to like explore his castle, and then at the hour and a half mark or whatever, he shows up and just starts trying to kill you.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
it really gets to the heart of pacing, and it'll help you figure out how to pace in other games as well. And then yes.
Oh, I just
here
real quick.
and then there. So go ahead.
Phill, I need to admit that I also turned Strahd Must Die into a 2 shot. So
How?
I'm really bad. Yeah.
You're really good. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
no.
You've defeated time.
No. Yes. Yeah.
Like you just,
It's a super fun. Absolutely, everyone should check that out. If you have any love for vampires, which you can tell we do up here.
If I can, I don't want to keep step over other people's questions, but I agree with all of that. I have had, just due to life circumstances, you know, when I was a kid, you know, we would get together and play for 7 straight hours or something, and now just
My back
getting
hurts.
adults
Yeah.
together, I mean, there's a hard 2-hour time limit or something like that on a game, and then we won't play again for a month. So I don't really, I think Phil's advice of like have something ready to go to end it that isn't reliant on the players having like made their way through something. But I also recommend, and you hinted at this with like the timer of like bring the players in on the act of managing your time, and make it clear to them that we will be ending at 9 p.m. You know, so it's not going to it's not going to be one of those awkward things where you got to keep playing later than you really want to, and just be like I recently run a couple Star Trek games that had really tight time limits, and I would just say periodically, this is how much time we have left. Let's move this.
Yeah.
it's really hard. I do see your hand. Yes.
I guess on that similar sort of note, what do you do when your players dither a bunch and they don't make a decision about where to go?
You pull out a D20 and you just roll it. Yeah. Right? Like, I mean, you can have something that comes after that, but often just the act of you taking an action will get them to take an action. So, yeah.
I mostly just silently seethe and feel panicky. I've gotten way better at talking like out of the game to players. And if we just need to hurry things up, I am better now than I used to be at saying, guys, we won't finish if we can't move on here. And I don't really have any great tips beyond that, but I do think there is this like tendency of like kind of over honoring like the game and forgetting that like this game is just a fake construct we're all collectively building, and we can manipulate it, like, so yeah.
I actually, to the person who's talking about the one shots, the one thing actually, Adventures League, like a good way to sort of understand pacing is also to read a lot of PFS and Adventures League modules, because those, you know, tend to be 3 or 4 things, right? And you can sort of pace things really well. It's a good sort of way to, they're like $3 or $4. You can just go to get them and see them. So.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, good
That
idea.
is a really good point.
The other thing is, the other thing I thought about is there used to be this concept in gaming world about giving your players sort of 3 clues to solving a problem. That has slowed down dithering at my table immensely.
Oh yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And on pacing, games like Shadowdark have you actually use a real-life timer for things like torches and other things, and there's consequences when those things go out, so using real-life timers. Another strategy is the Doom pool, which is as you're playing every few minutes, if your players are especially dithering and arguing about what to do next, you start putting D6s into a bowl right in front of them.
Yeah.
And when you feel like you have enough D6s in there, you roll it and you count up all the ones, and then like, that's how bad the encounter is going to be.
Yeah.
So they see you, and once they learn that's going to happen, they'll be like, oh no, we need to make a decision now.
Yeah. I like that.
That's wonderful. I've used, if you're familiar with Blades in the Dark and other games like it, they use clocks.
Yeah.
I will sometimes have an unlabeled clock out on the table that I'll
Yeah.
periodically just fill a pie in when
Yeah.
people are dithering. That works pretty well. I like your idea way better. The
Yeah.
dice.
Yeah.
So a question I had was, do you decide, say you're going to run a campaign, do you say, I'm going to run Pathfinder, and then decide like what's going to be in that world, or do you go, I want to do this world, and I think that D&D or Fate or Pathfinder would work best for that, and like, am I going to make my players count the number of arrows they have left in their bag and what their max lift weight is and all that, or do you, like, how do you decide what rules you actually are really going to consider?
Yeah. Do you want to start? Yeah.
I am very like conservative and cautious about like pitching games to the people I game with. I consider it kind of a privilege I have that they are willing to game with me and like trust me as a GM. And so I do way too much thinking in advance. If these are my situation is I have a group of people I'm playing with. So I know who I'll be playing with, and I know what they like and what they're up for. So I'll think these are like the 3 games I personally am interested in running. Which of these systems or settings are the ones that are going to work best with like these players? And then I usually give them a couple choices, like what do we want to play next? Here's like the 3 that I think would mesh well with like, but yeah.
Yeah.
Session -1.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Usually when I'm playing a game, it's because I'm excited about the game myself, right? So I often, maybe this is the wrong way to do it. I usually don't start with the players. I usually start with like the thing that I'm excited about, and then try to put that out into the world, tell too many people about it, and then see sort of who says yes to it. I find that's, for me, right, if you're going to take on the mantle of like running a game, right, like you're still a player at the table, but you're also the one who sort of cares the most about the game too, right? Like, so if it's going to sort of live or die based on your involvement at that point. So like if there's a game system I'm excited about and I can find the players that like want to play it, then becomes the frantic like, oh goodness, I need to learn the rules, right? You know, so like to your point about like, are we going to track arrows or not? Some of that's just sort of a game time decision based on like what people are interested in. I did play a D&D campaign where one of the players was interested in tracking their arrows, and they were interested in naming each arrow as well too, right? So like they had one, this will just stick with me forever, they named it Jessica Fletcher. All right, which is like a brilliant name for an arrow, right? Like, but it was very important for that player to go get the arrow, you know, and like every time they shot it, to get it back. That is way more interesting to me than like, oh, well, you've shot 5 arrows, we need to go back to town to buy, 10 more arrows. Like, yeah, so the mechanics should always support the sort of story and game experience that you want to tell, that you want to have.
Yeah, there's definitely games where knowing that you only have 4 arrows
Yes.
left, like, is a really adds to the experience.
Yeah.
So it really is like, is that the experience we want?
Yes, yeah.
So on the player dithering note, there's a lot of techniques have been mentioned to ramp up the pressure on the players and say like, come on guys, hurry up and make a decision. The other approach can work well too, of saying like, okay, let's take the pressure down and say, there's no right answer here. There's no gotcha if you make the wrong plan. Like it sounds like you've got a plan you want to roll with. Let's try it and I'll follow you and see where it goes. So whatever they come up with is the right plan. And some of the games like Blades in the Dark or Brindlewood Bay specifically kind of reward that kind of like, let's try it and see sort of approach.
Yeah.
Follow up on the genre question or the franchises. Can you play Aliens with somebody who has never seen an Aliens movie? Or
Yes.
That is.
can you, if you want to play Brindlewood Bay, do you have to assume a certain knowledge of like Agatha Christie mysteries before it's actually going to work? So how much baseline knowledge do you need someone to have of a genre or of the tropes or of a property before you launch the game?
Yeah, it's a super good question. I think for like Brindlewood Bay, I'll take that because like I ran that recently, right? That's a super fun game, and definitely at least one of my players had never seen like Murder, She Wrote, right? Which that's like a huge touch point. Yeah, Ben's back there saying, yeah, that was me. Yeah, so Brindlewood Bay, if you don't know, is a fantastic game you should all try. Like you are playing as a bunch of grandmotherly types who are part of a murder mystery book club, and there is a murder or an inciting event that happens within your town, and you have to go solve that mystery. So this is very Murder, She Wrote. You don't have to have watched Murder, She Wrote to like play the game. I think you do need to buy into the concept, right? And so like that gets back to the session 0 of you as a GM need to be able to explain this world sort of enough that it's not like they have to go do homework ahead of time to like really understand what's going to go on in this game. Yeah, so I think it's totally fine in Brindlewood Bay's case, right, to not have watched Murder, She Wrote. I think like Aliens might be a little trickier because there are a lot of like tropes involved in that. But I also think that if someone is up for kind of like gritty sci-fi, everybody's doomed. You know, if you can give them that pitch, like,
Yeah.
they're gonna like it. But also go watch Aliens because it's like one of the best movies ever. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have had players. So I ran a series of Star Trek games, and there was a player who, I don't know how this is possible, but he doesn't know Star Trek at all.
Oh.
And that was a problem, and that was a mistake on my part because what it led to was him just playing in a way that was very reasonable from his perspective, but like really clashed with like the theme. So, you know, in a Star Trek episode, you solve problems by like throwing technobabble around and you just hand wave it. It just has to sound mildly compelling enough, you know, but he was playing a more gritty, in his mind it was a more gritty problem solving with like real science.
Oh.
Something like that.
Oh, no.
I mean, it worked fine, but like that was one of my takeaways was like, I probably should have just had a 5-minute conversation with him and been like, this is what Star Trek is gonna feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to make sure that that your players have a base to come back to whenever they're playing a genre. So it's okay if you've never seen an Aliens movie before, if you know that there are giant, terrifying monstrosities that bleed acid.
Yeah.
And then, like, you're going to die to that. Right? That's the genre.
Yeah.
And that's exciting. Everyone's laughing now.
Yeah.
Similarly, in Brindlewood Bay, like, no, you are an old woman, and this is a cozy game, but something terrible has happened, right? Like, that's what you need to know. So, like, when your players pause, making sure that they have enough of the genre that they can go, oh, this sounds dumb, but it's in the canon genre. I'll just say genre like 12 times.
Yeah.
But knowing the genre is really important.
Yeah.
And to your point about Blades in the Dark, let's see where this goes. That is, Blades in the Dark, if you've not read it, is a wonderful
Yes.
manual
Yeah.
for like a world that exists. And it does such a good job of just giving you non-player character names and locations that you can just start rolling and then like ask your players, so what does Inspector Strahd look like? And then your players now are invested in whoever the heck Inspector Strahd is, and you literally just read that name out of page 70.
Yeah.
And having those kinds of setups, having that kind of prep work is really useful. So prep and genre bedrocks. Yes.
What do you do to help make the games like accessible for players with different like I've got ADHD, so like challenges there. But then also like I'm interested in running a game, but I'm really worried about being able to remember all of the things. Like, do you have any tips for that?
Andy does. Or I know a tip that you were talking about.
Oh, go for
No,
it.
So the best thing that I did for like running long-term games came from Andy, and it was at the end of each session, record yourself talking through what happened, and then before the next session, just listen to that again. The other thing that you can do with ADHD is to make sure that the system plays nicely with your constraints. So Blades in the Dark is really great because there's no stat blocks other than the character stat blocks. And there are lots of games similar to that these days. Or like where the mechanic, there's a system called Dread, which uses Jenga towers for your resolution, and you pull a stick out, and like either it falls and something terrible happens, or it stays up and you don't. And so finding the system that works for you and then being excited about that story, I guess.
Yeah, to the question of like accessibility for the players themselves. I mean, I think it's totally okay to not have sort of like one character sheet designed to rule them all, right? So like if you have players that gravitate towards sort of different ways of synthesizing information, by all means, like allow them to do that, right? Like I think like Andy, you've even mentioned this to me before too. Like if you have a player that just like can't keep their stats straight, totally fine. Get out some colored highlighters and just highlight those numbers in a specific color, and you can say like, oh, just your blue number, right? Like, yeah, making sure that stuff sort of lines up that way. I would encourage you to try running a game, right? Like again, if you're playing with your friends, like, just see. If you're worried about like keeping track of information, again, offload that to some of the players, and also sort of be okay with like restating what the truth is too at the beginning of sessions. I've done that often, where it's like, okay, we haven't met in a little bit. Let's just like take a minute and like, what is true, right? Let's all agree on that. If you have your notes, great. If you don't, then like, yeah, Inspector Strahd is like, he's not a vampire, right? Like we never agreed on that.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add except to say that's like a real concern. That's a real issue, like in my games that I run as well. And I think the thing it took me forever to learn was like, if just make sure you're running a system that you're not having to fight the whole time. So
Yeah.
if running D&D, if like you're always doing a ton of preparation and still feeling like you can't keep track of it or whatever, then I mean maybe that's a sign that there's so many games out there. There's a game that maybe gets to the experience you want and without the weight of like the rules or whatever it is that's hanging up. And I really am a big fan of offloading stuff to players,
Yep.
even to the point of having like asking someone to be like a co-GM with you, or to be ready to step in when you need it. So if like I've been playing D&D for like 40 years and I couldn't really tell you how like the spell or magic system memorization works or whatever, and so. That's something I'm happy to say, but for other people, they have that completely internalized. So I'm happy to say, I don't even want to engage with the magic system. So when someone has a magic question, will you just step in and handle it? And whether maybe it's combat or something else. But
Yeah, totally.
yeah, we had years ago, we ran a rogue trader game, and that's where you're traveling around space in this giant spaceship. And the like ship building rules were so far beyond my ability to engage with them, but one of the players, that was a really important part of the experience, is he wanted to have a ship that was custom built, that had exactly the weapons and the engines and shields and stuff that he wanted. So just let go of that stuff and say, you're in charge of this, and you're the expert on this.
Yeah, I hate drawing maps, but one of my players really loved it, so they became my cartographer.
Nice.
And they were always excited, and like it got to the point where we'd collaborate a little bit, and like, I need these kinds of maps. And then they showed up with them, and they play away from the table for them was really engaging and motivating, so that was good.
Yeah, I was kind of butt in real quick there, like building on the maps even, like you can ask a player. I'm a big fan of asking things of players. It's good for the player and it's good for the GM. And in the Band of Blades game I'm running, there's a player, one of the characters' player class or whatever is the lore keeper, and it's like their job to remember what we did last session, not mine.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful weight off of me.
So there's a question in the very back, I think. Did I see a hand?
He's got the mic
Okay.
right now, yeah.
Cool. Hi. There was a lot of talk about Blades in the Dark, and I've tried to read it, and I think I'm too D&D brained to get it.
Yeah.
What do you recommend for GMs or like a game, if running a game, and for players for switching to different systems?
Yeah.
And being able to get it. Yeah.
Just start playing. Sorry, for real, Blades in the Dark has a chapter called like Start Playing, and if you sit down with your group of friends and just follow that, like line by line, and do what it tells you to, that part of the book just solved it for me. And once I got it rolling, then I could start to explain it to people. But in a way that Dungeons and Dragons absolutely isn't. Blades in the Dark is just like a careening car that you stole, right? Like, like it's not your world, you stole it, and that's like what John Harper wants to give to people. Just to start playing will absolutely get that going. And then you'll be like, there's a little bit of like, oh, I have to look that up, and that's fine, and you can help your player, like your players can help you with that too. So, especially for Blades in the Dark. Play it.
And I'll say, like, I had that exact same experience with Blades in the Dark. Like, I've run that game, and I love that game. The first time I read that book, I was like, what? Like, I don't understand. There's parts of that really stick out. And it is the sort of book, like, I mean, this is such a nerdy thing to say, but you have to read this 300-page book twice to really understand it. But, like, the first time I went through it, didn't really get it. Started playing it, to Phil's point, and, like, stuff started to click. The other thing with that game in particular is, like, I had to find a flow chart that someone had put together online of, like, how the dice resolution mechanic worked. And, like, that was the thing that clicked for me. So, I mean, we've mentioned, like, play away from the table a couple times here. That concept of, like, you're not at the table, but you're still sort of having fun, like, prepping and stuff. That can be a good way to approach a game system, is to say, like, how would I distill this down into, like, a one-page sheet that I can hand a player? Of, like, so I'm reading this, like, I'm not really understanding it, but, like, how would I try to explain this to someone? And that can help you really, like, get a handle on some of the rules and things like that.
I will second or third that Blades is a game, and its sister games are games I love, but, like, they're very difficult. They're very difficult texts, I think, to, like, just to read.
But easy to play.
Yes, that's the thing. And so sometimes just finding a good actual play just can answer the question of, like, so what is this actually supposed to look like? Because you can get really lost in the weeds of, like, trying to, almost all of my Band of Blades prep is trying to understand the die, like the die rolling.
Yep.
But a lot of games, and Blades definitely has this, like, it's usually possible to winnow all of the complexity down to something really simple at the core. So, like, Blades in the Dark has this, like, there's a lot of ways you can manipulate and, like, a die roll, and a lot of different effects and modifiers and things like that you can bring into play. But it also there's an explicit mechanic for, like, if you're not, it's also fine to just pick up 2 dice and roll them, like, and not even, and set aside the, like, complexity. So I don't, in the last Band of Blades game I ran, I didn't do that. And, like, after the game, I was thinking, like, we spent a lot of time kind of wrangling with the die thing. I should have, but that simple mechanic was right there for me the whole time, and I didn't use it.
When in doubt, roll dice.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Back and then front.
We got someone back there with the mic, and then we'll come to you. Yeah.
Hi. So, first-time caller, long-time listener. I'm curious if you're willing to share some of how you design your prep, how you intend your prep. I also have a attention thing going on sometimes, and I find myself lost in weeds that aren't helpful. Like, I'll be prepping entirely the wrong thing for the next session sometimes, and I was wondering if you have any particular key points you make sure you have prepped or anything like that.
Are you enjoying the prep?
Well, that's my issue.
Yeah.
To clarify, I pursue the prep I enjoy, but it isn't always the prep I need, and that causes frustration.
Thanks a lot. So, talk about sessions. Like, another thing that you can explicitly do at the end of a session is ask your players where they want to go next, or what they think is going to happen next, so that you can lean into their expectations and then prepare in a way that is enjoyable to you and throw some twists at them, right? So when you're in a dungeon, you know that that dungeon is probably going to be a prescribed experience, and you can throw things at them as much as you like. But if it's an open world, and like you said, like, I prepped the quest for the blacksmith, and they spent the whole time at the tavern, right? Like, that's no good. But if you talk to your players and they're like, no, I was actually going to check out, like, the forest, and that thing by the river was cool, now you know. So just, like, asking, like, offboard the direction to your players.
I don't know if I have a great answer, but a few things I'll point out is learning to trust like random tables and things like that is helpful. Again, it's really hard to let go of the need to plan, but in my experience, it more often than not goes just fine when you determine like a room, what's in a room or something like that, or what's the situation by rolling on the table and inviting the players then to like help you fill in the details. I mean, planning is always, I mean, that's just the problem of GMing, right? Like you're planning for something that is 100% guaranteed to miss some of what you're doing or to go awry. And I mean, the only other thing I would say is if you think, the more you're able to think about the kinds of the more you're able to think about it in terms of like, what are the key choices that I want the players to have to make in this scenario? To keep it kind of vague. And then not lock yourself into a really specific incarnation of that. I think that's helpful for me, although it doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like, if you can get the basics down, right? Like it's hard to say like what are the basics for the game that you're running. But I mean, I think like, you know, making sure that you have sort of enough of a baseline knowledge of what you need to be comfortable with what's gonna come up, I think is useful. I'm with you though, it can be really hard to know like what that is though, especially if you're distracted and you're like, I'm gonna get this monster stat block, you know, exactly right. It's like, but that's not really the thing that's gonna matter necessarily, like, right, like it feels like maybe they wanna talk to the blacksmith or like hang out in the tavern, and there's gonna be no fighting. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's like, it's hard to know what that is, but I mean, I think if you can, you know, lean to your strengths too, right? So if you've, again, like, a lot of this advice comes down to just like ask your players what they want to, but like if you're like, I have prepped this amazing boss, that's what I have, can we not hang out in the tavern today, right? Or like have it burst through the door, or, you know, like whatever, right? Like that's okay too, yeah.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Thanks for coming out here. This has been great.
Yeah.
I have a question concerning, I DM multiple tables and multiple times a week. Is there a good way to manage all those tables without, you know, because you're juggling a bunch of things at once and trying not to lead to burnout? Because I am approaching burnout. Is there something that I can do to help mitigate? Any advice would be awesome.
You might need to run fewer games. Yeah. I mean, that's really hard because like I've definitely hit that point where you're like, I am dreading this session, and it's not just like the like anxiousness about like running a session or something. It's just like I'm not gonna have fun doing this, right? And like so again, if you are not collecting a paycheck from it, like tell your friends, can we just hang out today, or you know like we need to cancel or reschedule, or you know whatever like that. But yeah, I mean I think so like that's one element too. Of it, I mean, there's probably like a perfect folder system you could set up to make it easier to like, you know, show up to the games. But I mean, I think that would be my advice is like, you know, play a little bit less, but enjoy it more when you do play.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's healthy, but I mean, role-playing is maybe the only activity in my life where like I often find myself dreading. I know I'm gonna have fun, but I am dreading like the game session for one reason or another. And I wish I had. I don't think I have a good answer for you because that's just a hard thing. I mean, the only thing I could say is, yeah, like, is this a net positive? You know, is it a net positive for you personally? And if not, you know, yeah, I don't know. Just be open with the players. Like, this is too much or something.
Yeah.
So burnout comes from. I've been doing a lot of reading on this recently, actually. Burnout happens when pressure turns into stress, and stress happens when you don't have the necessary resources to feel like you are doing a good job. And this comes from Mo Gawat's podcast, Unstressable. So, plug the ex-CEO of Google at a TTRPG thing. So looking at places where you can find more resources or gather more resources from, which goes back to offloading things to your players and giving them roles that they're excited about might help you. And then also finding other places to take some of the prep work away from what you're doing would be useful, maybe. So if you're, yeah, and this goes all the way back to the beginning of like, run a session, or if you're doing it like in an Adventurers League style, you don't always have to run new things. You can just run the same adventure again and give them different pre-gens, things like that. If people are showing up to play your games, great, and then whatever keeps it fresh, but that you've already got in your mind, so that you don't have to spend resources you don't have and get burned out.
Phill, you had actual expertise there, and yet you waited for me and Chris to blather through our
I feel like we walked into your trap.
We've got time for one more question.
Okay, so I know that the first response to this question is going to be have a conversation with your players beforehand.
Yeah.
But my friend here will remember, perhaps with some amount of trauma, that I ran a World of Darkness, like kind of Chronicles of Darkness game a few years ago, and one of, despite my best efforts to communicate the genre of how kind of horrendous some of these games can be, one of my players walked in with a mage who was just like, essentially a human version of a sparkle wizard. And when World of Darkness things started happening, there was this sort of shock moment. What kind of ways would you have to sort of rectify, like, if you realize, like, oh, I'm several sessions in and like some of my players are like essentially have been excerpts from a different genre or something like that? What would you have them leave, or like, not leave, but like revise, or how would you approach that sort of thing if you realized later on?
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
Oh, you're thinking, okay. I'll vamp while he's thinking about the correct answer here. Yeah, I think so you're right, talking to the player, right, is sort of the right approach there. I mean, it's a really interesting thing. I mean, I think it gets a little bit back to session zero, a little bit back to sort of like a lines and veils discussion, if you've heard of those things, right? So talking about sort of like what you're okay seeing happen, what shouldn't happen at all, right? So like, you didn't do that, whatever, that's fine. Like, yeah, so you're in there. If you can talk to the player, great. If not, I mean, one approach is like, can I modify the game, right? Is this someone that I want to play with, right? Like, is there a way to modify this game or to bring them along to like sort of balance the darkness that's happening? If that's still not okay, I mean, it is also okay not to play with everybody that you want to play with, right? Like, you can talk to the player, again, get outside of the game and say like, it sounds like, or it feels like this is not the sort of the game for you. Do you want to sit this one out, or do you want to revise your character, like what you were saying?
I think, yeah, when I'm running longer campaigns, I am pretty explicit about about having like, not a trial period, but I'll state that I would like to run, whatever, I'd like to run all the way through Ravenloft this year. Let's all commit to like 3 game sessions and then evaluate if we want to continue. And like, that's a natural off-ramp for anyone for whom there's a miscommunication or something like that. And it's you have an easy out if you need to either say this game is going in a direction that doesn't seem like it quite meshes with what you want, or just to say, this isn't, if that's too awkward or too stressful, you can also say, this didn't work out. Thanks for playing through we completed the 3 trial sessions that I wanted to do, and let's do something else.
Yeah. Those are the meta things. I avoid trauma at the table by using a spreadsheet, that or a anonymous chat tool, and I don't start if I'm playing with new people, right, Adventurers League, I don't start playing until I see that there are X number of anonymous people in that chat room equal to my players, so that everyone is in there, but they're anonymous. And so this gets then to the X card, which is it's a card on the table, and if someone taps it, like you rewind and whatever just happened didn't happen, and then you continue with the narrative. So that would be, going forward, a safety tool I would use would be like something where someone can just be looking at their phone and then anonymously something comes up. Like, that's fine. Comment in the front.
What specific thing do you use?
Yeah, so I just use a Google Sheet that only has one cell, and I make it available to anyone with the link. And so then I keep that on my phone, and if I get a notification like the cell popped up, like, that's how I do it.
That's a great list, but yeah, it's really good. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry we're out of time for this panel. I want to thank you all so much. So Phill and Chris and Andy, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
I had fun. I hope you had.
I would also like to invite you, if you are a GM and want to run a game next year at the convention, you can see Marissa, who's right back in the doorway, and she can take some contact information from you. So we've got a full day planned. Thank you all so much for coming.
Yeah.
It's a blast.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Come
everyone.
play.
Yeah.